Hello, everyone, and welcome to the advocates meeting, the weekly advocates meeting that we have in the DAO. And today's focus is going to be all on the advocate contributions process, which we will officially launch with this meeting today. So I'm super excited. We've had a ton of work going into this process. It's going to be one of those critical things that enable the DAO and the advocates to closer connect on all of the work that you're doing. And today we're going to walk through the process to let you know how it all works. And I'm excited to see a lot of advocates here and fellow DAO members as well. So I'm going to get started today with a new site that we are launching as part of this contributions process. This we call ClickUp Docs site. So we have two docs sites at this point. One is on Gitbook, and the other one is this one. This is the ClickUp Docs page. And the link to that page, we can share that. I've also updated it in the info channel. So you can find the ClickUp Docs page over there. And it contains a number of information that we can collaborate around fairly easily because it's closely tied to ClickUp. And ClickUp is a platform that we heavily use in the DAO for many of our workflow processes, including the advocates contributions process. So I'm not going to go into the details of the page. You can click through and there's already some information in there. This is a page to check in on regularly. We are going to update this with information beyond just the contributions process. So let me just give you one quick example. Juliana, for example, has already put in some useful information on the translation guide. You can see there is a ton of information there. So to all text translators out there, you have some additional information here as well. We are going to structure this essentially by the two main pillars that we have, the community grants program and the advocates program. And then we have a section, DAO operations, where you find some information that we share with the advocates as well. So this is the page, the Advocates Contributions Guide, that we will walk through today. And I want to start off maybe by introducing the concept of what advocate contributions are and what the process is meant to support. So you typically have two things that you are in front of. One might be a situation where you are planning on doing a contribution, but you don't know whether the DAO would recognize that as an advocate and support it accordingly. And you want to get confirmation on that. And for that, we have a process that we call confirmation request. So that is something where you do before you actually start the contribution in itself. And there's a form for that where you then can fill out the details that you then get to the DAO, and we are reviewing it and getting in touch with you, talk about it, and then come to a decision on it. The other situation is where you have completed a contribution. And here we have also a form that we call proof of contribution. We're going to very much Web3 aligned with that term. And in here, it's a form that is fairly similar to the confirmation request form. You also put in the details where you then essentially tell us, this is what I've done as an advocate. This is what I've contributed to. And that's so incredibly important because right now the DAO really doesn't know in a structured way all of the contributions the advocates are doing. And it helps us to understand all the good things that you are engaging in. And it helps us also to understand how much time you spend on it. And we are going into the concept of advocate grants. And that's something that I'm very excited about because through this process, we will be able to identify all of you that are heavily engaged and are contributing at a rate that is above and beyond expectations and worthy of an advocate grant. So these things, these processes, I call them processes, but I don't like the word process actually. These forms, they are now ways for us to connect, and the DAO is now also able to help you. it help you to succeed in the advocate contributions that you are planning to do on the front end, and also help you promote some of the contributions that you have done, right? And that is important too. And if we don't know about them, like right now, many cases we don't know about, we also have then no way to help you promoting your good work. Let me stop here for a moment. Any questions on what the contributions process is at a high level? This is a session where everyone is free to ask questions. Okay. Then let's move on and go to the contribution and confirmation request first. Confirmation request you find for every role, as well as for the proof of contribution. Here you have quick links to it. And every role is very unique. And that was one of the challenges that we were faced with, and where we were looking at a process where we want to make sure we speak to the uniqueness of each role, because a text translator is doing inherently different type of contribution than an event evangelist, for example. And we want to recognize that. So for every role, you have a page. Oh, hang on, somebody's talking. Let me mute you for a sec. He's out. Good. So for every role, you have a page. And the first thing you want to do right now, once you go to that page, is read through your role. So let's go to community care, for example. It describes what the community care role is. You have the forms here as well, the confirmation requests and the POC. And then you have a section that is also there for every role that we call Endorsement Catalog. So the Endorsement Catalog is something that we worked with select advocates on about a couple of months ago, because we wanted to identify the type of contributions for each role where we want to say you don't need to ask the DAO whether we support it or not. If it's in the Endorsement Catalog, then we do endorse it, and you can go about contributing to that contribution and then only submit the POC at the end. So for community care, we are saying here, community care takes place in Web3 online, and we have a ton of channels out there. We have official channels by the graph. You see the direct links that take you to. So you can see exactly what we're talking about. If you do community care in the forum or on the graph Discord server or on Telegram or on Reddit, you can engage. You don't need to ask the DAO, does that qualify? You often find tips in your section. That's also true for every role. And read through those tips. They help you to be more effective in your own role as well. And if we go down here for the community care role, you see community channels that we have. Now we're talking about the Graph Advocates DAO itself. This is the Discord server where we're in right now. If you do community care here, that qualifies. The same with Graphica, Graphtonauts, Curation Station. And we're going to update this list as the community grows. We also have unofficial Telegram channels. So those is the international, the regional communities that we have. And here we are tying in with the graph as well, everything that is listed there as an unofficial chat. We also include here. So if you happen to be very much engaged in your regional channel, that also qualifies as long as it is on this list. Okay. Then lastly here, each section has recognition parameters where we explain, and this is now in sort of like, this is what you can expect there to be a minimum threshold or minimum expectation for relative to what we would expect an advocate to contribute to. And then we also speak to the grant threshold. Now here we are talking about specific to the role, but we will later on show how we actually aggregate that and calibrate it across all 6 roles. And every section also concludes with an FAQ. In the FAQ, we have role-specific FAQs. So for example, what counts as qualifying time for community care, right? If you're asking yourself, if I'm sitting in front of a computer for 6 hours, but I haven't actually read a message, but I was on call, I've monitored the conversation, Does that qualify? And you find your answer here. And this too is something that we are continuously updating as the questions come in, so that we provide as much clarity as possible. Okay. So you find the same structure for every role, obviously with updated contents, right? For the content creator role, we are talking about the type of contents and the content catalog categories. For event evangelist, we actually have a listing here of specific events that you can engage in that are graph specific. We also have Ethereum events. So if you say, for example, I want to engage in Ethereum events, if it is listed on this list, you know it is endorsed, right? So you have good resources here to identify what you can engage in already, and also get ideas and where you want to get engaged in. Technical teacher and so on. I'm not going to go through every single role, but this is the structure. And over here, that's sort of the summary page where you find quick links to both the confirmation request and the proof of contribution. Okay, let's go to one of those forms. Do we have questions? Let me look up here for a minute. There's lively chat going on. Are there any questions anybody has? Okay, I don't see any questions. Then we're good to go. So this is how a confirmation request form looks. And in this case, it is for community care. There are some general instructions here. Please read through them. They are important. The most important instructions I can give everyone now when it comes to reimbursements. Every time you have reimbursements that you seek, or you have expenses that you seek reimbursements for from the DAO, you need to submit a confirmation request up front. If you lay out those expenses, don't tell us about it, and you submit a POC at the end with those expenses, then we will ask you to submit a confirmation request, but we may not approve it depending on whether or not it fits with our guidelines. So you run the risk that the DAO may not approve your expenses if you don't submit it up front. So if you have expenses, you want to get reimbursed, always start with a confirmation request, regardless of whether that event itself is endorsed. It's about the reimbursement, that we will be talking about during the confirmation request, which is important. We've designed each form role specific. So there are some general data points here that we capture for every role, but there's also role specific information in here. So make sure that you submit through the form of the role that you want to get the recognition for. Don't submit a text translator contribution via the community care form. You will not have the necessary data points to report it appropriately. So make sure you use your role, especially important if you have multiple roles, you contribute in multiple ways, that for each contribution, you pick the right form. So we try to keep it as brief as possible. We didn't want to introduce a huge administrative effort to submit the forms. We have tested it. I think from the feedback that we've seen so far, it is about 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes, and then it's done. It's essentially all about describing what you have contributed to, so that we get the information to properly evaluate whether it fits with the mission of the DAO and whether we approve that request. So if we look at, for example, at the community care proof of contribution, so this is now at the end, proof of contribution, you have completed the contribution. You can see similar sort of data points here as well. There are slight differences, but the form is pretty similar. We do have a few folks here. I'm going to pick somebody now, Chudabum. I know that you have been part of the soft launch last week and tested the form. Can you share how well it worked for you? Was it overall? How was the experience? You got anything to share?
Um, Thank you, Oliver. So I would say as a community care, submitting the POC for the community care, it was pretty straightforward. I didn't need to uh, do anything. All I needed to do was to just go to the POC section, fill out the dates. For me, I picked a week. So submitting contributions for like a week interval, and it was pretty straightforward. No difficulty in that.
Nice. So each role has its own sort of challenges in with regards to sort of reporting the POC. One example is, when do I submit a POC? If you are an event evangelist, right, that might be fairly clearly defined because it's almost like a project with a clear start and an end date, and then you can submit at the end of it. If you are a community care person, that is a continuous engagement, right? And you have to figure out, when do you submit your contribution. So each role is a little bit unique and specific, has specific sort of dynamics to that. For community care, we generally say try to submit once a week if you are regularly engaged, in community care, because that gives you a timeline where your memory is still fairly fresh and you can gauge pretty well how much you have contributed. But then for events, we would suggest to do it per event. If you are a Web3 welcomer, right, and now we're talking about, say, you want to introduce somebody into Web3, that could be an engagement that could last from anywhere from a day or two to 6 months, right? Because it might take some time, depending on who you're working with. And look at it in terms of chunks, and find the best way that it works for you, in a way where you can describe the actual contribution that you've made.
Oliver, can I also add that submitting a POC for a community care, I didn't need to submit any confirmation requests. All I needed to do was to just fill out the POC.
Yes. So again, so if you, for community care, if you're engaged in the graph ecosystem in one of the channels, you don't need to submit anything. If you are an event evangelist, you might submit a lot of confirmation requests, because many of those, if they are in real life, they may occur expenses, and that means you have to submit confirmation request for it. So I think for each role, we see different sort of volume of confirmation requests coming through. But what I would really encourage everyone is to make sure you submit your proof of contributions, POCs, because that is really the most important thing. And I also want to let everyone know here on the call, you can start filling out these forms starting right now after this call. Not right now, after this call. And you can submit contributions all the way back to the date when you were onboarded as an advocate. So if you were onboarded 3 months ago, you can submit everything over the last 3 months that you have contributed to as an advocate. So that is live.
Oliver,
Yes, go
can
ahead.
I ask something? I'm not able to look at the website, so I'm not sure if, like, I'm listening on my phone, so I can't really look at the stream. So I'm not sure if it was visible on there, but I had a question about, for example, if you're doing Web3 Welcomer or Evangelist, um, are there thresholds listed for what is a valid contribution? Like, for example, if you do an event and there's only 3 people, is that still a valid event, or do you need a certain number of people there? That kind of thing.
There is no set threshold for those types of things, but we do ask for that type of information. If you do a local meetup and all you ask for is your train ticket expenses to be reimbursed for $50, and you meet up with 6 people and you, uh, talk about the graph and maybe have some new folks there as a Web3 welcomer, then that might be something we will support. If that is something that requires $1,000 for, then we might challenge that thought, say how can it be so much for an event this small. So it's really situational, and this is how we treat the confirmation requests. Every confirmation request we receive, we expect there to be a degree of uniqueness to that we need to take into account. And it's very difficult to have sort of these standard thresholds, like it has to be this many people or that, because there are always exceptions, and we want to account for that.
All right, so basically we're encouraging anyone to submit anything, and if it's relevant, we need more info, or it's like the money they're asking for is too much or something, then we just ask them, basically.
And when we say everything that is in the spirit of a graph advocate, right? So it should be graph or Web3 related, and it should be for something
of course.
where you wore the graph advocate hat. Yes.
All right, that's good to know. Thank you.
Can you talk more about backdated contribution? How far back do we want advocates to go? Well, we have launched the program. We really have had our first advocates onboarded in April, right? If I remember correctly. So all the way back to that very first wave, for sure. So if it's in April, you can even do April. What is the benefit of the advocate doing this? There can be retroactive grants be issued. If you have contributed and we've seen significant contributions that you've made, we have a grant threshold that we'll be talking about here in a minute, and I will explain how that process works. Moving forward, if an advocate misses a week or month, should they always just go into the form and make the update versus a time period in which it would make sense? It wouldn't make sense anymore for the advocate to do that. You can always report essentially at any time. One thing that we will take into account is the time at which the POC will be submitted. We will do quarterly evaluations for grantability, and we will be talking about that in a moment. But other than that, if you miss a week, then you just submit it the week after, or the month after. That's fine. Does that answer the question, Nick? Awesome. Cool. So go to the site. Again, the link you find in the info channel on this server. And there are many valuable links there, useful links. Check it out there, and you will get to the site. You check the Advocates program, and then there's the Advocates Contributions Guide. And there you have all the information that you need and all the links that you need to submit the forms. If you have any questions that are general to the process itself, please post them in the Advocates chat. If there are role-specific questions that you have, for example, how do you evaluate the performance of a text translator? Then please ask those in the text translator or role-specific channels, and then we'll get to that. We do expect certainly a ton of questions. We hope we're going to see a lot of questions. And as the questions come in, we will also update the FAQs. So make sure you read through the documents and the FAQs so that you don't ask questions that are already covered in the documents. Okay. How can we specify an embarrassment for text translation? Like we didn't spend anything on it. Well, you wouldn't, right? So many roles do not have actual expenses. And that's perfectly fine. We're only talking about situations where you would have actual expenses. Then you would go through the reimbursement process. The reimbursement process is in itself something that we will cover in the session tomorrow. If we have time today, I will maybe dive into it a little bit. But that is a topic in itself, and we're going to have another session tomorrow where we're going to be talking about that in more detail. All right. So let us now get into the process of contributions evaluation. So let me put it into slideshow. I know I have a wide screen. I think you see a lot of blacks on left and right. I apologize for that. But I want to talk about how we evaluate advocate contributions and why that is a challenge.
I think you're not sharing your screen anymore, Oliver.
Oh, I
Check
don't?
that.
Oh, yeah. I guess I have to, why do I not show my screen? I got kicked out. Oh, let me go to slideshow first. There, here we go. Okay. Now you can see?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. I apologize for the small screen there. So, what do we mean when we say evaluating advocates' contributions? We have a challenge at hand where the 6 roles in the advocates program, right? They are so unique and different in nature. And we want to award contributors in the advocates program that are really going above and beyond expectations. So the challenge here is, how do we translate those diverse advocate contributions into a model that is equitable in the way we recognize those contributions? Meaning, if I have somebody who is doing 10 text translations in a quarter, how does that compare to someone who organizes one event? It's difficult, right? And you will never get it right. We know that too. But we want to try to get it right and try to get it to a point where it's also transparent. We have static. Okay. So I want to introduce to you how we have set up. Sorry, I gotta mute you. So the way we have it set up, we've come up with a model, and I want to explain how that model works so that you all understand how we think of that and how we will process it. So it'll all come down to the hours when we think about the thresholds for the minimum expectations as well as then the grant threshold. And there are a number of hours that we actually sort of come up with throughout the process. First off, there are the reported hours. And pretty much every role has a field in the POC that has hours in it. And in there, we want you to tell us how much time did it take you to complete the contribution. And that's what you report to us. The DAO member then evaluates the POC and validates the hours with support of role-specific guides that we have developed. And we spend a ton of time on that. And even now, we still don't know how good it is, but we are going to find out, and we are going to continue to update and fine-tune it. But we're making the effort to validate the hours that were contributed to each of the contributions that you have submitted. Then a DAO member will also evaluate on a POC basis the performance and difficulty rating of the contribution. So here we are trying to have an impartial assessment, in part because we have developed guides for that as well, where we will put each contributions on a scale that essentially then adjusts the numbers. So if you have had low difficulty contribution, right, it adjusts the numbers down. If you have high difficulty contributions, it adjusts it up. So this is a generalized sort of statement, and we have it broken down. We look at it very, very nuanced because every role has that defined differently, and we have our domain experts in the DAO for each role that will do the review and approve. So you have folks that are in your own role doing the review and approval of it, and also the assessment. So we end up with something we call advocate hours. And the advocate hours is the most important hour for determining the advocate grant. Let's go through some examples. So these are totally made up here. But we're going back to what we saw on the page earlier. I held a workshop. My name is Ian, and I'm a technical teacher. You report 4 hours to us. We can verify it, and we then assess it. And based on the assessment, we say, Ian did a tremendous job, and therefore his advocate hours have gone up, right? And in this case, to something like 6. I posted a delegator blog, right? Mary, and I'm a content creator. She reported 8 hours, and based on our assessment of the blog, we verify it's 6 hours, and the contribution was solid, so it stays at 6 hours. I onboarded my sister to Web3, and that's Mary again. Now, she did a job as Web3 welcomer. She has 2 roles, right? She did 2 things. She said it's 18 hours. We verified it's 18 hours. And it was a solid contribution, so it stays at 18 hours. So this is how it goes, and this is how it essentially will come out, right? Attended ETH Mexico event, says Paul, an event evangelist. Reported 24 hours, we verified 24 hours, but we also verified that Paul didn't really do much there, right? As an advocate, other than being there. So we might adjust the hours down. Now, this is how it goes. Every month, we have this long list, right, of these types of contribution with these types of numbers. And we then essentially take it to something where we evaluate the aggregate of the contributions, and we have thresholds in place for advocate hours. At the lower end, it is 5 hours, and at the upper end, it is 10 hours per month. So what we're saying is the 5 to 10 hour range is what we would expect, the average advocate to fall under. This is where we feel now an advocate has shown commitment to the program and has given us really solid contributions. And in that 5 to 10 hour range, that is where the average advocate expect to be. Now, if you are above that threshold, we will start issuing advocate grants. And the amount here is $30 per hour for every hour that you are over the advocate grant threshold. So if you are at 11 hours, then you would have 1 hour of grantable amount there, and so on. It is a max amount. It could be lower in the end because we have budgeted for this grant, and for Q3, the number is in the neighborhood of 15,000, which is 500 hours that we have budgeted for advocate grants. So if all of your submissions taken together, right, are essentially below 500 hours grantable advocate hours, then we would be at $30 per. If it is above that, then we will average it out. Everyone would get the same, but the $30 number could get lower. We are trying to make sure that quarter over quarter, we are budgeting in a way where we can pay out $30, but we cannot guarantee it. And this is our first quarter. We don't know exactly what we're going to see, so we keep fingers crossed that we did our estimations right. Now, we calculate this on a quarterly basis, and we pay it out on a quarterly basis, but we assess it on an average per month basis. So now let me explain that. We have roles such as the event evangelist, where we have the expectation of hosting one event per quarter, for example. We would therefore expect an event evangelist to have a couple of months with 0 hours, and then they report it in the third month, and then we get like 30 hours. So we average out that 30 hours over that quarter, so it would be 10 hours per month. And that's the assessment that we would make. We want to try to keep it equitable across all roles, because other roles have expectations that are put down more on a monthly basis, right? Or even bi-weekly basis, I think. A community care, right? We say something on a weekly basis. So we want to make sure we treat everyone in that sense from the same, because otherwise an event evangelist in 1 month would get advocate hours for everything, but only because it was reported on that month, right? So we calculate it quarterly, we assess it on a per average monthly basis, and that's how we pay out, and the payout comes out quarterly. So let's go back to those examples that we've had to just quickly show how that would work. We saw Lisa in the earlier example. She contributed 2 hours. That would be not qualifying for an advocate grant. Then we have Ian. Ian had 6 hours, and that too was below the 10-hour threshold and is within the expectation range. Then we had Paul. Paul had 18 hours, and that was for the East Mexico event, for the example that we had. So that means he's 8 hours over the 10-hour advocate example. And that would qualify for a $240 advocate grant. 8 times 30. And in the case of Mary, she had 2 contributions. We aggregate those contributions, right? It's across the roles. You add them up, and together it came out to be 24 hours, and that would be $420 advocate grant. So again, these are fictional examples, right? It is not based on real numbers by any means. But this is essentially how the math would work. So let me stop here for a moment, as I shared a lot of information. Any questions here? I'm sure there are a lot of questions on this.
I have some questions.
Yeah.
Well, again, I can't really look at your presentation because I'm on my phone, but for example, if you have an event evangelist, they attend an event and they have to buy a train ticket. But they then also at the event, it's like a full day event, like an EVE event or something. They attend it for 6 hours and they explain stuff to people, etc. Do you put both of these things in the same grant or contribution report, or how can I view that kind of thing?
So you would put in all those hours into the POC. You want to make sure that you submit as cleanly as possible on a per contribution basis, right? So you should think about the scope, what was this part of, and then submit.
All right.
Make sure to not submit things twice, and that could, for example, also happen if, say, you are collaborating with others. Say you've created content, you wrote a blog, and that blog is 4,000 words long, and your collaborator did 50% and you did 50%. So now both of you are advocates and submit the POC. If both of you would submit for 4,000 words, well, then you've double dipped, or in a sense, or over reported.
Yeah.
So
That
you
makes sense.
you would have to split it up. Report your own contribution in the truest sense possible.
So in the example I gave, if I attend an event and the train ticket is 50 euros and I spend 8 hours there, I would submit that both of those things in one submission. Like, oh, I spent this money and I was there for 8 hours and I did X, Y, Z while there.
Correct. In the case of an expense, you would first get the confirmation from the confirmation request form. So you would submit the upfront form, right? The confirmation request, and ask whether the $50 get reimbursed. We would then, handle everything through that process to make sure you get reimbursed. And once the reimbursement is completed, you would then you would proceed essentially by submitting your POC.
All right, that makes sense.
So we have a question here. Let's see. Let's say I have submitted a form with 15 hours of text translation first week with around 5,000 words or more. And then next week, in the same month, I submitted a new form with new translations again with 15 hours and 5,000 plus words. Will that be 30 hours per month? If it falls in the same month, then yes, it would be 30 hours for that month, correct. Or my hard word may get lost somehow if budgeted and hours are reduced. I don't understand the last one. My hard word may get
Can
lost.
you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I want to ask how will be the rate per hour be calculated? What will be taken into this calculation? As we see in the example of the presentation, we have some kind of different rate per hour. And the second one is 500 hours will be for all advocates or only for one? Because I didn't hear it because of Discord lag.
Yeah. So if you take our budget that we have set aside for the grants and you divide that by the $30 that we want to pay out per hour, you get to 500 hours. So those are 500 hours that accumulate above the 10 advocate hours threshold. So we're talking about grantable hours. So if somebody submits 11 hours, then or has completed 11 advocate hours, then 1 hour of that would be grantable, and it would be taken out of the 500 hour pool, so to say, right? So it's for the entire DAO, the 500 hours, and that is for the last quarter, for this quarter.
Yep.
So
Thanks.
the other question: how do we assess? I can't possibly explain it for every role, because every role has a domain expert that has spent a ton of time to come up with an assessment model on how to best evaluate the performance and difficulty of a contribution. So let me explain it as best as I can, and Juliana can correct me if I'm wrong with anything. In the case of the text translation, we have the following things that we're going to do. There is concepts as text difficulty. There are tools out there that can screen a text and can give you a difficulty rating of how difficult it is to comprehend that text, which also means how difficult it is to translate it. So that is a difficulty rating that we obtain automatically. There are aspects such as language distance. So if you are, say, German, like myself, and you translate into English, then it is true to say that the German language is fairly close to the English language, and it makes it easier for anyone to first pick up the language and to subsequently translate it. If you are an Asian speaker, for example, if you're from Japan, it is inherently more difficult for a Japanese person to pick up the English language, right? So that's what we call language distance. How far off away are you to the original source text, which obviously is typically English that we're talking about. We take that into account. That factors into the difficulty rating. We have things like we can check, I don't know what it's called now, whether text was translated by a machine. We can actually detect that, and we can get a score for translation, and that factors into the performance rating. So these are examples that where we use methodologies as best as we can to obtain a objective performance and difficulty rating for each contribution. And that is what changes the verified hours from the advocate hours. This is where adjustments can then take place, where we want to reward great performances and that are also very difficult in nature versus less well performed and not so difficult contributions. If you hold a workshop on how to delegate in the graph protocol, for example, that's not as difficult than to hold a presentation on substreams. There's a difference in difficulty there. So we have these guides worked out that we will use to assess the different criteria, and they will essentially subsequently then change the hours from a verified to an advocate hour. Does that explain that?
Yeah, very appreciate about that. Thanks.
Great questions. What other questions you got?
Actually, one more question. We had some forum posts where people had contributions, like attending ETH Bogota, I think, and those would be potentials for getting reimbursed. But of course, the reimbursement system doesn't exist until today. So, is the DAO doing anything for people that already posted proposals or something on the forum or on Discord where they wanted reimbursement, but the process wasn't in place yet?
It's a good question. We can provide a specific answer to that maybe later. Maybe somebody can keep that down. Something we should discuss. I do have a view on that, but we haven't really confirmed that in the DAO yet. So we'll get back to it. Of course, everything going forward will apply. But if we go back, and then here the question really is how far we can go back with that is something we still need to determine.
Yeah, that makes sense. The example I'm thinking of is very specifically, like, I think you yourself posted on it as well. But there might be other examples also where people already asked for funding in a community grant or it wasn't relevant or something, and I'm curious if we're gonna be discussing that. So I guess we are.
One of the next big things that I feel that we need to pick up on in the DAO is the fact that we do see community grants out there that have a salary component included, right? So, for example, there's one out there that I looked at today. It was for some real life event in Argentina for subgraph development bootcamp hosting, right? So they laid out the costs and they said, here is salary that we account for with for the presenters essentially. So it includes a problematic dynamic, right, for the advocates program. when you allow salary components to be included in community grants that cannot be included for advocates who are doing the same kind of contribution, right? Now we're putting the advocate program worse off compared to a community grant, and that's not what we intend to do. So we are having first discussions on that. Our focus has very much been on getting this process up and running, but I think this is going to be something that we need more clarity on, and we're going to discuss that in the DAO.
All right. Thanks for clarifying. That's good to know.
Any other questions?
If there aren't any questions, I'm wondering, should we dive into the reimbursements a little bit at a high level, kind of preparing ourselves for tomorrow's session?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit. I don't want to start a new session with 6 minutes left only. So tomorrow, same time, we have meeting where we're going to cover reimbursements. At a high level, we have worked out templates that you will be able to download and make copies of that will help you to capture your expenses by category. That when you submit your expenses going forward, you have an easy way to identify, what exactly you are asking for. We will have currency conversion included because you are contributing all over the globe and have different local currencies than the US dollar that we denominate for in the reimbursements itself. So we have that included. And we have a structured process where every time that you do a reimbursement expense, we will send you a file where you can provide us with the details. And then that file will be there, and we work through everything from the point of time that you submit the initial reimbursements, all to the point where we may ask you to submit the invoices. We will also explain how we try to arrive as best as we can to approved amounts. So if you are asking us upfront for reimbursements and you are going, to, I don't know, name a place, Berlin, Germany, and you want $800 for hotel costs for 2 nights reimbursed, we might say that is a little bit high for a place like Berlin, and we're going to adjust it down. We're going to have a dialogue on that. And the way we do that is we have a purchase price model, a global purchase price model that is broken down by cities, cost of living indicators included, where we can essentially break it down to what are the average local costs, that we would typically see for the typical expense reimbursement items. So we're going to talk about that as well. So that's where I want to probably leave it, because there is certainly a lot of nuance associated with that as well, and we would expect that we see a lot of questions coming up on that tomorrow. So make sure to tune in especially if you are an event evangelist and you do expect expenses to come up at some point throughout your advocate career. You definitely want to be there tomorrow. Any other questions? Somebody spoke up?
No, I think I just want to say thanks because it was an interesting explanation.
Well, thank you for being here and joining in. It's much appreciated. So we have 3 minutes left. That's the amount of time I can give back to your day. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Also, again, I know that was a lot of information to digest. Feel free to ask questions in the Discord channels, in your role-specific channels, as well as the advocates chat. DAO members will gladly help you and answer any questions you might have.
I do actually have a question, which probably was also in the presentation, but where are we gonna be listing all the pages and forms and stuff for this program? Are they gonna be in Discord, on the website, or?
Yeah, so you go to the Discord channel. In the info channel, you now see a new link that is called ClickUp Docs. And in ClickUp Docs is where you will find the information in the Advocates program and then Advocates Contributions Guide. And that's where all the information is.
All right, that's good to know.
Alrighty. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.